It was 11:00 p.m. when I noticed an unfamiliar BMW in my driveway. Upstairs, my shower was running, and a strange perfume wafted through my foyer. It was at that moment I realized my HOA president had gone too far. I had just hauled my luggage up the circular driveway of the colonial mansion I inherited. Having returned 2 weeks early from a European business trip, I was anticipating nothing more than a relaxing hot shower and a full 12 hours of sleep. Instead, I discovered my home illuminated, like a holiday decoration, with music emanating from the living room and the distinct sound of someone singing poorly in my master bathroom. The scent struck me as soon as I turned the key in my front door. An expensive floral perfume that had been a fixture at neighborhood board meetings for months. It was the same overwhelming fragrance that seemed to envelop Veronica Whitfield like a poisonous cloud of self-importance. My HOA president was no longer just making my existence miserable with citations and fines. She was, quite literally, residing in my home, using my personal shower, and, from the sounds of it, making herself entirely comfortable. What would you do if you came home to find someone living in your house? Leave a comment letting me know where you're from and if your HOA has ever attempted something this audacious. But first, let me explain how I found myself in this situation. My name is Marcus, I'm 47, and 6 months ago, I inherited something entirely unexpected. A 4,200 square foot colonial mansion in Millbrook Estates. This is the kind of neighborhood where lawns are meticulously measured and residents communicate via passive-aggressive notes. My Aunt Dolores had lived in that house for 30 years. She was the type of person who baked snickerdoodles for newcomers and maintained detailed journals about everything. A practice that would later become my secret advantage upon her passing. She bequeathed me her pride and joy. A house valued at $850,000, completely paid off. After a costly divorce had depleted my savings like a financial hurricane, this inheritance was like hitting the lottery while being struck by lightning. A painful yet ultimately fortunate event. When I first entered the house, it smelled of lavender and old books, blended with the distinct aroma of high-quality hardwood found only in homes built to endure. Each morning, I would awaken to the soft ping of the old radiators as they warmed up, a sound that confirmed I was finally in a place I could call home. However, every paradise has its serpent, and mine was a woman who wore pearls, drove a BMW, and possessed the personality of a parking meter with delusions of grandeur. Veronica Whitfield, 52, had been the HOA president for 8 arduous years. She was a real estate agent and the sort of person who pronounced community standards with the gravity others reserve for national security. She resided in a smaller townhouse at the edge of our development, nice, but a far cry from the expansive colonials in the main section where my inherited property stood, and it was clear that this disparity bothered her immensely. The sharp sound of her heels on my front walk signified her initial visit. I was in the middle of unloading boxes when she materialized, clipboard in hand like a sacred artifact, looking as if she had just stepped off the cover of a magazine called Suburban Dictator Weekly. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she stated, though her smile lacked any warmth, resembling a tax audit. "I'm here regarding your mailbox situation." It turned out that my aunt's classic black mailbox, which had served as a sentinel for 3 decades, was in violation of the sacred forest green color scheme mandated by the HOA. The texture of its weathered metal spoke of thousands of deliveries, but it seemed nostalgia held no sway against neighborhood aesthetics. "The fine is $150 if you fail to comply within 10 days, she declared, savoring the words as if they were a fine wine. "But this mailbox has been here since before my time," I argued. "Past violations do not excuse current ones," she retorted, handing me the citation with the smug satisfaction of someone who believed they had just cured cancer with paperwork. That was merely the beginning. Week 2 brought a citation for my trash cans being visible after 6:00 p.m. Despite the fact that pickup was at 5:00 a.m. and my job often kept me out late, the sound of gravel crunching under her tires became a noise I grew to dread, typically preceding the rustle of another citation being tucked under my door. In week 6, she complained about the cars of my teenage son Tyler's friends, which were parked on the public street during his weekend visits. "It creates an unsightly cluster of vehicles," she explained, as if a gathering of teenagers constituted a municipal crisis. Week 12 delivered her masterpiece. A threatened fine for excessive commercial activity because my cybersecurity consulting business necessitated occasional equipment deliveries. Apparently, 3 boxes from Amazon were enough to classify my home as a warehouse. The pattern became as clear as my aunt's crystal chandelier. Longtime residents could leave their trash cans out all night, paint their shutters any color they chose, and host parties that rattled the windows, all without receiving citations. Yet for Marcus, the divorced newcomer with the impressive inherited house, every action was scrutinized like evidence in a capital case. "She's territorial," my neighbor Beth whispered to me one morning as we collected our newspapers. Beth was in her 60s, retired, and had the warm disposition of everyone's favorite aunt. New people pose a threat to her little kingdom, especially when they inherit homes she can't afford. When I arranged my 3-week European business trip, I confided only in Beth and Tyler. Somehow, Veronica discovered my plans the evening before I was scheduled to leave. The familiar click of her heels signaled her presence. "You really shouldn't leave a property like this unattended," she remarked, her eyes already surveying my foyer as if she were a general planning a military campaign. "I could keep an eye on things for you." "Thanks, but I have it under control," I answered, her expression turned cold enough to freeze hellfire. "We'll see about that." 3 weeks later, I arrived home at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The conference in London had concluded early, and I was eager to sleep in my own bed. The scent of jet fuel still lingered on my clothes as I pulled my suitcase up the familiar driveway. My mind set on a hot shower and 12 hours of sleep. That was when I saw it. A gleaming white BMW parked precisely where my own car should have been. My house was lit up like a Las Vegas casino. Every window was aglow, the porch lights were blazing, and I could hear music coming from what I assumed was my living room. The crunch of autumn leaves beneath my feet felt unnaturally loud as I neared my own front door. Feeling like an intruder in someone else's life, I circled around to the back, relying on muscle memory from childhood visits to locate the spare key, hidden under a loose brick near the garden gate. Years of visiting Aunt Dolores had taught me that the back door was often the most sensible way in. She used to say that front doors were for appearances, but back doors were for family. The first thing that registered was the smell. A heavy, expensive perfume permeated the air like a toxic mist, the same cloying floral scent that trailed Veronica at board meetings, but beneath it, there was another odor. The smell of my kitchen being used by someone else. Takeout containers littered my granite countertops like criminal evidence, and I could see used wine glasses in the sink. My wine glasses, which had been filled with wine from my personal cellar, as I moved stealthily through my own home like a thief, documenting the scene with my phone. My cybersecurity training took over. In my consulting career, I had assisted divorce attorneys in gathering digital evidence, and the primary rule was always consistent. Document everything, assume nothing, and never allow emotion to compromise the evidence. I took pictures of the unfamiliar clothing on my bedroom chair, the different shampoo bottles in my shower, and the prescription medication on my bathroom counter, blood pressure pills prescribed to a V. Whitfield. The sound of running water echoed from the upper floor, accompanied by what could charitably be described as singing. Someone was taking a shower in my master bathroom, and they sounded as if they owned the place. I ascended my own staircase, each step producing its familiar creak, until I was at the landing. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and steam billowed out like proof of a violation. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a silhouette that was definitely not mine. "Veronica," I called out, my voice resonating off the marble tiles. The singing ceased as if a switch had been flipped, though the water continued to run. "Marcus?" Her voice was as brittle as thin ice. "You're not supposed to return for another 2 weeks. It's my house, Veronica. I can return whenever I damn well please." She came out 5 minutes later, wrapped in my bathrobe, the thick terry cloth one that still held a faint trace of my cologne. Her wet hair dripped onto my hardwood floors as she stood before me in my own hallway, looking as guilty as a cat discovered next to an empty fishbowl. "I can explain," she started, pulling the robe tighter around her. "There was a report of a break-in in the neighborhood. I was safeguarding your property as a community service." I pointed to the empty wine bottle on my nightstand, a $200 Bordeaux I had been reserving for a special occasion. "By consuming my vintage collection and sleeping in my bed?" Her face turned a deep red, but she doubled down with the tenacity of a Las Vegas gambler. "I have HOA emergency authority over unoccupied properties during security crises. It's perfectly legal. Show me the documentation." She strode into my home office, my home office, as if she owned it, and produced a folder I had never seen before. Inside was an official-looking document titled Emergency Caretaker Agreement, dated the day after my departure, and it included what appeared to be my signature authorizing her temporary oversight. This is where my expertise in digital forensics came in handy. I had spent years analyzing forged documents for corporate clients, and this signature was riddled with red flags. The pen pressure was incorrect, the letter spacing was off, and the M in Marcus had a flourish I had never used in my life. An interesting forgery, I commented, taking out my phone to record. But document analysis is literally my profession. Just then, a toilet flushed in my guest bathroom, and my night transitioned from strange to utterly bizarre. Out came Dave Kowalski, dressed in a full police uniform. He wasn't just any officer, but the married father of 3 who lived 2 streets away and coached Little League on the weekends. The same Dave who had always seemed like a respectable guy at neighborhood gatherings. "Is everything all right here, Veronica?" Dave inquired, his hand resting on his service weapon as if this were a routine domestic dispute. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with the finality of a vault door closing. This was more than just trespassing. It was organized fraud with the backing of law enforcement. Veronica hadn't simply been squatting in my house. She had been conducting some sort of operation with police protection. "Dave," I said, my voice steady. "You do realize you're in my house without authorization, don't you? Off-duty, yet in uniform, with a woman who has been living here illegally while I was abroad." Dave's composure vanished like morning mist. "She said you gave her permission to house-sit." "Did I grant you permission to be here?" A tense silence hung between us like a stretched wire. "Because all of this is being recorded," I added, holding up my phone, "and I have a feeling your department has stringent policies about officers getting involved in civil matters, particularly when fraud might be a factor." Veronica's face had changed from red to the color of old mayonnaise. "You can't prove anything illegal occurred here?" For the first time since entering this nightmare, I smiled. "Actually, I can." The next morning, I awoke in my own bed for the first time in 3 weeks, though awoke is a generous term, as I had barely slept. Every creak of the house made me wonder if Veronica had made copies of my keys. My first action was to call a locksmith. My second was to begin investigating just how far this rabbit hole went. While the locks were being replaced, I examined my violated home like a crime scene investigator. The garage had its own story to tell. My tools had been used and returned to the wrong places. There were oil stains on the concrete where a second car had been parked, and my workbench had been converted into what appeared to be a staging area for home improvement projects. Not my home improvements. My neighbor Beth arrived at my door around 10:00 a.m., holding a casserole and wearing an expression that suggested she had significant gossip to share. "I was wondering when you would find out," she said, taking a seat at my kitchen table as if she were about to reveal a state secret. "Veronica told everyone you were subletting to her for a while. She said you needed the rental income after your divorce." The sense of violation was both personal and financial. She hadn't just taken over my space. She had stolen my reputation and privacy as well. "She hosted a dinner party here last Thursday," Beth went on. 8 people, catered food, and she used your dining room as if she were showing off her own home. I found it strange, but she had an explanation for everything. It was then that I found my security system had been professionally deactivated. Not just cut wires or amateur work, someone had bypassed the sensors with a level of skill that costs a significant amount of money. I had installed that system myself following my divorce, partly for security and partly because tinkering with electronics helped me manage stress. Seeing it surgically dismantled felt like discovering surgical scars you had no memory of receiving. By noon, Veronica had launched her first counterattack. An official HOA notice was posted on my door, summoning me to an emergency board meeting that evening. With only 24 hours notice, it was technically legal according to our bylaws, though just barely. The charges sounded like a prosecutor's wish list. Disturbing the peace, harassment of board members, and my personal favorite, threatening behavior toward community officials. The meeting took place in the community center, a beige rectangle that smelled of industrial carpet and shattered dreams. 5 board members were seated at a folding table that seemed more appropriate for a church bake sale than a judicial hearing. Veronica presided from the center chair, dressed in a navy blazer that likely cost more than most people's car payments. The outcome was decided before I even entered the room. 3 of the board members were current clients of Veronica's real estate business, a fact I had uncovered during my post-confrontation research. The 4th was her cousin, Janet, who possessed the critical thinking abilities of a decorative gourd. Only the elderly Gladys Pembroke appeared capable of independent thought, and she looked visibly uncomfortable with the entire situation. "Marcus," Veronica began, her voice filled with feigned concern, "we've received troubling reports about your behavior last night. Witnesses described you as aggressive and threatening." Witnesses, plural? I surveyed the room and saw exactly 0 individuals who had been in my house during the confrontation. "I would like to hear from these witnesses," I stated. "Officer Kowalski has provided a detailed statement regarding your erratic behavior." She responded, sliding a paper across the table. "Dave's report depicted me as an unstable homeowner who had stormed into my own residence and made threatening remarks toward a community volunteer who was protecting the property in the owner's absence." The creative writing was remarkable. He had managed to make breaking and entering sound like a public service. They allotted me 3 minutes to defend myself in their kangaroo court. 3 minutes to explain why discovering someone living in my house without permission had made me aggressive. "I would like to see the board minutes that authorized this emergency caretaker program." I requested. Veronica shuffled papers as if she were dealing a deck of cards. "That's an administrative matter. I would also like to see the HOA bylaw that grants you the authority to occupy member properties." More paper shuffling. "The board possesses broad emergency powers. Could you please cite the specific bylaw number?" The silence that followed was longer than a budget meeting. Finally, Cousin Janet chimed in. "We don't need to justify our authority to you." At that moment, I understood this wasn't about bylaws or authority. It was purely about power. My experience in corporate consulting had taught me that most bullies depend on their victims being too intimidated or uninformed to resist. They rely on people not knowing their rights or lacking the resources to defend them. The vote was 4-1 to fine me $1,500 for harassment of community officials. Gladys was the sole dissenter. Bless her heart. They also levied a $500 monthly monitoring fee until I could demonstrate compliance with community standards. Whatever that entailed, as I was leaving the meeting, Gladys approached me in the parking lot. The autumn air was filled with the scent of wood smoke from a nearby fireplace, a smell that should have been comforting but instead felt ominous. "She's done this before?" Gladys whispered, looking around as if we were plotting a prison escape. "The vacant house thing, previous targets just moved away instead of fighting her." The elderly woman's words struck me like a cold rain, but they also provided something I hadn't had before. Confirmation that this issue was larger than just me. The following Monday, I entered the law office of Sarah Morgan, Esquire, with a banker's box filled with evidence and a level of determination that probably registered on the Richter scale. Sarah specialized in property law and HOA abuse cases, a field I learned exists in depressing abundance. Her office smelled of leather and confidence, with diplomas arranged on one wall like battle honors. "Let me guess," she said after I had presented my story. "They're claiming emergency powers that aren't actually in your bylaws." Sarah's first discovery caused my blood pressure to soar. The HOA's emergency caretaker authority was entirely fabricated. After spending just 15 minutes reviewing our community's governing documents, she found 0 references to emergency property oversight, temporary caretaking, or any authority that would permit Veronica to squat in my house. Her second finding was even more gratifying. The board had never held a vote on such authority. There were no meeting minutes, no resolutions, and no documentation of any kind. The power Veronica claimed was as real as a unicorn, though apparently more lucrative. The third discovery made me want to frame Sarah's law degree. Veronica had been collecting monitoring fees from other homeowners for 3 years without any legal foundation. She had essentially been operating a protection racket using clipboards and official letterhead, while Sarah tackled the legal aspects. Veronica initiated her counteroffensive with the subtlety of a hand grenade. On Tuesday morning, an anonymous tip to the city building inspector alleged that my home office was an unpermitted commercial space. The inspector arrived while I was at a client meeting, but my security cameras, freshly reinstalled and better hidden than CIA surveillance equipment, captured the entire event. The inspector spent 20 minutes examining my property with someone who clearly had intimate knowledge of the layout, someone who pointed out precisely which windows belonged to my office and where the electrical connections were situated. The inspector found no violations because there were none to find, however, as he departed. He mentioned to my neighbor Beth that the person who called in the tip had detailed knowledge of my home's interior. Gee, I wonder who that could have been. Wednesday brought another anonymous complaint, this time alleging that I was operating a business from a residential property in violation of city zoning laws. The pattern was the same. Someone with specific knowledge of my work setup, who knew exactly what equipment I possessed and where it was located. Thursday marked the beginning of the social media attack. Posts began to surface on Nextdoor about the difficult new resident, who was creating problems for longtime community members. The Whisper campaign portrayed me as everything from a tax evader to someone likely concealing assets from my divorce. My teenage son Tyler came home from school asking why neighbors were interrogating him about my activities and whether I was in some kind of trouble. On Friday, Dave's police colleagues began their intimidation campaign. Suddenly, patrol cars were cruising down my street with the frequency of pizza deliveries on Super Bowl Sunday. They would slow down in front of my house, sometimes stopping to inspect things that required no inspection. The message was clear. We are watching you, but Saturday was when I fought back with the nuclear option of the digital age. Data recovery. My background in cybersecurity had taught me that most people delete files in the same way they discard newspapers. They believe it's gone. But it's actually just hidden. Veronica had been careful not to use my computer directly, but she had underestimated cloud backup systems and automatic syncing. My home security footage told a story worthy of a Hollywood film. It showed 10 days of Veronica entering and leaving my house as if she owned it, bringing guests, including what appeared to be potential real estate clients, for tours of my property, using my pool and kitchen, and hosting what seemed to be small dinner parties in my dining room. The most damning footage captured her systematically photographing the interior of my home, room by room, with professional lighting equipment. She wasn't just squatting. She was documenting my house for business purposes, but the digital smoking gun was even more compelling. Hidden within my computer's temporary files were traces of failed login attempts and cached data from her phone when it had connected to my Wi-Fi. She had attempted to access my personal files, financial information, and client data. The attempts were unsuccessful due to encryption, but the digital fingerprints remained, like breadcrumbs leading directly back to her phone's MAC address. Sarah Morgan's reaction to this evidence was the most beautiful thing I had heard since my son's first words. We're going to destroy her in court. By Sunday, the neighborhood network had shifted. Beth arranged an informal coffee gathering in her backyard, ostensibly to discuss community concerns. 8 households were represented, and by the end of 2 hours, we had uncovered a pattern of harassment and intimidation that stretched back years. Mrs. Peterson from Maple Street had paid $800 in fraudulent landscaping compliance fees. The Johnsons had been pressured into using Veronica as their real estate agent when they considered selling. Even the quiet Mr. Williams admitted he had paid citations for violations he was certain other neighbors committed without any consequences. The coffee meeting concluded with something I hadn't anticipated. Solidarity. For the first time since inheriting my aunt's house, I realized I was not fighting this battle alone. But as we would learn on Monday morning, Veronica was far from finished with her bag of dirty tricks. Monday morning delivered the kind of breakthrough that alters the entire course of events. Sarah Morgan called it 8:00 her tone that of a lawyer who has just found the treasure map. Marcus, we received the court order for the HOA financial records. You need to come see this immediately. I drove to her office, still wearing my pajama shirt and clutching a travel mug of coffee as if it were a lifeline. Sarah had spreadsheets laid out across her conference table like battle plans, and her expression was a mix of triumph and disgust. Your friend Veronica has been quite busy, she said, gesturing to highlighted rows of figures. We've identified $47,000 in payments made to vendors that do not exist. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Emergency roof repairs for storms that never occurred, tree removal services for trees that were still standing, and parking lot maintenance for a lot that hadn't been serviced in years. Each invoice was professionally formatted, and every amount was just below the threshold that would necessitate board approval. But this is where my cybersecurity background proved invaluable. While Sarah examined the legal ramifications, I traced the digital money trail. Every fraudulent vendor check had been deposited into accounts associated with Whitfield Property Solutions LLC, a company that existed solely on paper and in Veronica's bank account. She's been systematically defrauding the entire community, I remarked, watching the numbers accumulate. But there's something even bigger at play here. That's when Sarah presented the file that made everything fall into place, tucked away in my home office papers. the ones Veronica had clearly rummaged through. We discovered her business plan for Whitfield Premium Property Management. The document was essentially a criminal manifesto masquerading as corporate strategy. Her plan explicitly detailed using temporarily vacant luxury homes as showcase properties for high-end real estate clients. She hadn't been squatting in my house merely for convenience. She had been running a sophisticated con, using my inherited mansion as her personal showroom to impress affluent buyers, the dinner parties, the professional photography, and the tours for potential clients. It was all part of a scheme to portray herself as a manager of luxury properties she could not afford. The email chain we uncovered was even more damning. Correspondence between Veronica and a company called Elite Estates Management revealed they had been splitting profits from the unauthorized use of vacant homes across 3 different counties. My house was not her first venture. It was simply her most ambitious, but the most shocking revelation was her backup plan. Buried in the files was a purchase agreement template, pre-filled with my property address and a sale price $200,000 below market value. She had been preparing to claim financial authority over my house through some form of emergency lien process, essentially attempting to steal my inheritance through legal paperwork and administrative manipulation. My neighbor Beth's forensic accounting background, a detail she had modestly omitted during our coffee meetings, proved indispensable. She had spent her career investigating corporate fraud, and Veronica's schemes were textbook examples of embezzlement and property fraud. The total amount stolen across all communities is likely over $200,000. Beth explained that evening as we sat in my kitchen, with documents spread across the table like evidence in a war crimes tribunal. She has been targeting vacant properties, elderly homeowners, and anyone who seemed too intimidated to fight back. The scale of the operation was breathtaking. 6 different HOA communities, dozens of victims, and years of systematic fraud. My case was no longer just about someone squatting in my house. It was about dismantling a criminal enterprise that had been operating under the guise of community service. That night, as I sat in my reclaimed living room, the various components of Veronica's operation became crystal clear. She was not just a petty tyrant intoxicated by HOA power. She was a professional con artist who had discovered how to monetize homeowner intimidation. The violation of my home suddenly felt less personal and more strategic. I had not been randomly targeted. I had been specifically chosen because my inherited house represented the perfect combination of high value and vulnerable ownership. A divorced man dealing with a recent inheritance, still learning the neighborhood dynamics and temporarily away on business, but she had made one critical miscalculation. She had targeted someone with the technical skills to trace her digital footprint, the financial resources to fight back legally, and the stubborn resolve to see it through to the end. As I locked my newly secured front door that night, I realized the real battle was just beginning. We hadn't merely discovered evidence of fraud. We had uncovered a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond my violated sanctuary, and tomorrow we were going to start taking it apart piece by piece. Tuesday morning transformed my kitchen into a war room that would have made Pentagon strategists envious. Sarah Morgan came with legal briefs, Beth brought her forensic accounting arsenal, and I provided enough coffee to sustain a small army. The aroma of freshly brewed determination mingled with the scent of highlighter ink as we devised our multi-pronged assault on Veronica's criminal empire. Sarah outlined our legal strategy like a general planning D-Day. First, a civil lawsuit for trespassing, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and defamation. Each charge carried its own penalties, but more importantly, the civil discovery process would compel Veronica to produce documents she would prefer to keep buried deeper than Jimmy Hoffa. The FBI is interested, Sarah announced, sliding a business card across my granite countertop. The Financial Crimes Division wants to discuss the mail fraud angle. Every fraudulent HOA notice she sent constitutes federal mail fraud, which carries significant prison time. The State Real Estate Board was equally eager to investigate unlicensed property management and the misuse of client information. Apparently, using other people's homes as your personal showroom violates approximately 17 different professional regulations. Beth's forensic accounting work had provided the smoking gun we needed. Detailed financial records that showed exactly how HOA funds were diverted into Veronica's personal accounts. There were years of fake invoices, phantom vendors, and emergency repairs that never occurred. The paper trail led directly to her, like a GPS for fraud detection. Here's what most people don't understand about HOA law, Sarah explained, pointing to highlighted sections of our community bylaws. Emergency powers must be explicitly granted in writing. Any fines exceeding $100 require unanimous board votes, and board members must disclose any financial conflicts of interest or face personal liability. That last point was crucial. Every fine Veronica had imposed without proper board approval was legally void. Every decision she had made while concealing her real estate conflicts exposed her to personal lawsuits, and every dollar she had collected through fraudulent fees constituted theft, plain and simple. While Sarah prepared the legal artillery, Beth and I organized a community mobilization campaign. We set up a homeowner rights information session at the local library, carefully framing it as an educational event rather than a confrontational one. The aim was to equip our neighbors with the knowledge needed to recognize and resist HOA abuse. Without turning it into a witch hunt, 23 homeowners attended, drawn by word of mouth and a genuine curiosity about their rights. What we uncovered during that meeting was both heartbreaking and infuriating. 18 different families had been victimized in some manner over the past 4 years. Mrs. Morgan from Oak Street had paid $2,200 in emergency landscaping fees for work that was never done. The Rodriguez family had received 17 citations for violations that identical actions by other neighbors seemed to escape. Even the tough-as-nails contractor Bill Morrison admitted he had paid fraudulent fines rather than contest them because he lacked the time for HOA politics. The pattern was as clear as my aunt's crystal. Veronica systematically targeted anyone who couldn't or wouldn't fight back. New residents, elderly homeowners, single parents, people with language barriers, anyone who appeared vulnerable or distracted by life's challenges. By the end of that meeting, we had something more powerful than legal documents. A united community ready to demand accountability. The technical aspects of our evidence collection became my area of expertise. Every homeowner who had been victimized was given a simple documentation template for dates, amounts, witnesses, photographs, and copies of any correspondence. My cybersecurity background was invaluable in organizing the digital evidence and creating encrypted backups that even the NSA would find impressive. We set up a secure communication network using an encrypted group chat, partly for security and partly because it made everyone feel like they were part of a resistance movement, which, in a way, they were. The media strategy required careful handling. Having worked with investigative reporters during my corporate consulting career, I understood the importance of providing them with a complete story rather than fragmented information. Local TV news outlets are always interested in stories about authority figures abusing power, especially when there is visual evidence and sympathetic victims. Sarah filed a motion to freeze Veronica's assets before she could hide or transfer the stolen funds. The legal mechanism was complex, but the principle was straightforward. You cannot profit from a crime while it is being prosecuted. Meanwhile, I began documenting everything for a potential documentary. The story had all the elements that capture public attention: corruption, abuse of power, ordinary people fighting back against injustice, and enough evidence to fill a small library. But the psychological warfare was perhaps our most effective weapon. I started attending every board meeting with Sarah by my side, politely requesting detailed financial documentation for every decision. My calm, professional demeanor stood in stark contrast to Veronica's growing agitation. "Could you explain the bidding process for this vendor?" I would ask. "Where are the receipts for this emergency repair? What documentation supports this fee structure?" Each question was perfectly reasonable and entirely legal. Each question also made Veronica visibly uncomfortable, because each question had an answer she could not provide without admitting to fraud. By Friday, we were prepared to launch our coordinated offensive. Legal papers had been filed, federal investigators had been briefed, media contacts were ready, and the community was organized. Veronica had built her small empire on intimidation and ignorance. We were about to show her that knowledge and solidarity are remarkably effective weapons, too. Veronica's reaction to our organized resistance was swift, desperate, and entirely predictable. By the following Monday, she had filed a restraining order against me, alleging harassment, stalking, and threats. The petition read like a work of fiction, complete with claims that I had been driving past her house and intimidating her real estate clients with erratic behavior. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. The woman who had been living in my home without permission was now accusing me of stalking her. The restraining order hearing was set for Thursday morning at the county courthouse, a building that smelled of justice and floor wax. Veronica appeared with a budget lawyer who looked as though he had obtained his degree from a Cracker Jack box, while I arrived with Sarah Morgan and a banker's box of evidence that could choke a horse. Judge Patricia Morrison possessed the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had heard every sob story and legal excuse imaginable. She listened to Veronica's tearful testimony about feeling threatened and unsafe with the patience of a saint and the skepticism of a seasoned jurist. Mr. Reed has been deliberately intimidating me at board meetings, Veronica claimed, dabbing at her eyes with tissues that seemed to materialize from her purse. He follows me around the neighborhood, watches my house, and makes threatening comments about my business. Her performance was worthy of an Academy Award, complete with a trembling voice and strategic pauses. If I hadn't been aware she was lying through her teeth, I might have felt some sympathy for her. Then, Sarah rose with our timeline and security footage. Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Mr. Reed has never been within 500 feet of Ms. Whitfield's residence, Sarah stated, presenting printed screenshots from multiple security cameras. These timestamps correspond precisely with the dates she alleges he was stalking her. The footage was damning. While Veronica claimed I was lurking around her house on Tuesday evening, my security system showed me hosting Tyler's study group in my kitchen when she alleged I had confronted her at the grocery store on Saturday. Credit card receipts placed me at a client meeting 50 miles away, but the decisive blow came when Sarah presented audio recordings from the HOA board meetings. Ms. Whitfield claims Mr. Reed has been threatening and aggressive, Sarah told the judge. These recordings from public meetings paint a very different picture. The audio was incriminating in its politeness. Every question I had asked was reasonable. Every comment was professional, and every interaction was so civil it was almost boring. In contrast, Veronica's voice on the recordings became increasingly shrill and defensive as I requested basic financial documentation. Judge Morrison's expression shifted from neutral to annoyed. Ms. Whitfield, do you have any evidence besides your testimony to support these stalking allegations? Veronica's lawyer produced Dave's written statement, which corroborated her claims about my aggressive behavior, but Sarah was prepared for that as well. Your Honor, Officer Kowalski was present in Mr. Reed's home without permission when this alleged aggressive behavior took place. His statement conveniently fails to mention that he was there as Ms. Whitfield's guest, not in any official capacity. The judge denied the restraining order with the kind of judicial irritation typically reserved for frivolous lawsuits and parking ticket appeals. She also cautioned Veronica about filing false claims, which felt like an early Christmas gift wrapped in legal precedent. But Veronica's desperation was only just beginning. The following week brought a coordinated campaign of dirty tricks that would have impressed a political strategist. Anonymous complaints to my business clients alleged that I was under investigation for fraud and facing serious legal consequences. Fake online reviews appeared on my company's website, claiming everything from incompetence to criminal behavior. Most disturbing was the attempt to drag Tyler into her web of deceit. My son came home from school upset because someone had called the administration, claiming he was being neglected and left alone during my business trips. The school counselor, who had known Tyler for years, saw through the transparent fabrication, but the stress it caused my son was real and infuriating. Then came the visit from Child Services. A very serious social worker named Janet Rodriguez appeared at my door on a Wednesday evening, armed with a clipboard and a concerned expression. Someone had reported that I was frequently absent for business travel, leaving my teenage son unsupervised for extended periods. The complaint was so patently false it was almost comical. Tyler was 17, an honor roll student, a varsity soccer player, and more responsible than most adults I knew. Nevertheless, I dutifully provided documentation of our parenting arrangements, emergency contacts, and Tyler's academic and extracurricular accomplishments. Ms. Rodriguez spent an hour touring our home, interviewing Tyler and reviewing our family situation. Her final report not only dismissed the complaint, but also commended our stable home environment and Tyler's exceptional maturity and academic performance. The false report backfired spectacularly, creating an official record of Veronica's harassment tactics while highlighting what good parenting looks like. Tyler, bless his heart, was more amused than upset by the entire ordeal. Does she really think she can intimidate us with fake complaints? He asked that evening as we ordered pizza to celebrate the clean Child Services report. Doesn't she realize we have actual evidence? And she has what? Exactly. Smart kid. He had inherited his gray-tant's practical wisdom along with her house. But while we were celebrating small victories, Veronica was preparing her most desperate gambit yet. And this time, she was prepared to bring down the entire neighborhood association with her. Veronica's final act of desperation was like watching a disaster movie in slow motion, confronted with mounting legal pressure and a community that was finally seeing through her deceptions. She opted to burn down the entire system rather than face the repercussions of her actions. It began with a mysterious computer crash. "I'm so sorry," she declared at the emergency board meeting she had called for Tuesday evening. "Our financial records have been completely lost. My computer crashed over the weekend, and regrettably, our backup system failed as well." The timing was as suspicious as a lottery winner purchasing tickets with the following week's numbers. Just days before a court-ordered financial audit, every digital record of HOA transactions had inexplicably vanished into the electronic equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle. However, Veronica had underestimated two things: my cybersecurity expertise and the fact that in the digital world, deleted does not actually mean gone. While she was performing her technological tragedy for the remaining board members, I was collaborating with a data recovery specialist who owed me a favor from a previous corporate case. The beauty of modern computer systems is their inability to truly erase information. They merely hide it and pretend it has disappeared. Within 48 hours, we had recovered 87% of the lost financial records from her computer's hard drive, including browser history that showed she had researched how to permanently delete files and data destruction software the morning before her supposed crash. The recovered files exposed the full extent of her operation. Email chains with fake vendors, detailed plans for property takeovers, and a spreadsheet that tracked which homeowners were most likely to pay fraudulent fines without resistance. She had been running her scheme with the methodical precision of a corporate enterprise, but the definitive evidence was an email draft she had never sent, in which she complained to her accomplice about that cybersecurity guy who thinks he's so smart. The draft detailed plans to destroy all evidence and make sure nobody can prove anything happened. While we were recovering her digital trail, Veronica initiated her Scorched Earth campaign within the community. She convened a special board meeting to vote on emergency assessments totaling $15,000 per household to cover unexpected maintenance costs and legal expenses. These assessments would have bankrupted half of the elderly residents and forced young families to choose between their mortgages and HOA compliance. Her pitch to the three remaining board members who still believed her was a masterclass in manipulation. Marcus Reed's vindictive lawsuit is costing our community thousands in legal fees. Every homeowner should pay equally for the damage his harassment has caused. She was essentially attempting to make the entire neighborhood finance her legal defense, while portraying herself as the victim of my wealthy newcomer privilege. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening with minimal notice and maximum pressure, but our community network was prepared. 43 homeowners attended that meeting, a record turnout that left the community center with standing room only. The air was thick with tension, mixed with the aroma of Beth's homemade cookies, which she had brought because confronting corruption is more effective on a full stomach. The elderly Gladys Pembroke, now fully aware of Veronica's tactics, stood up with a voice that could have shattered crystal. "I move to remove Veronica Whitfield from the board for financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty." The vote was swift and decisive. 4-1 to remove Veronica from her position, with only her cousin Janet casting the dissenting vote. Janet herself was voted off the board 10 minutes later for failing to exercise proper oversight of financial irregularities. But Veronica's humiliation was not yet complete. As she gathered her papers and prepared to storm out, FBI Special Agent Maria Santos entered the community center doors with a presence that makes guilty people confess their sins on the spot. "Ms. Whitfield," Agent Santos said, her voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement, "we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of mail fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal wire fraud statutes." The handcuffs clicked with the finality of justice delivered. As Veronica was led away, she made one last desperate attempt to maintain her victim narrative. "This is all because of him," she shouted, pointing at me. "He has destroyed our community with his lies and vindictive lawsuits." The 43 homeowners who had gathered to witness her downfall remained silent as the FBI escorted her to their unmarked sedan. The only sound was the autumn wind rustling through the oak trees that had watched over our neighborhood for decades. Long before Veronica's reign of terror began, Tyler, who had been sitting quietly in the back row doing homework during the meeting, looked up from his calculus and remarked, "Well, that was dramatic." It was the understatement of the century, delivered with the dry humor he had inherited from his great-aunt Dolores. In the parking lot afterward, neighbors lingered longer than usual, as if no one wanted to end this moment of collective vindication. Beth organized an impromptu potluck for the following weekend to celebrate new beginnings. And for the first time in months, people were genuinely excited about community activities. But as satisfying as Veronica's arrest was, the real victory was what happened next. A neighborhood that had been divided by fear and intimidation came together to rebuild something better than what they had lost. 3 weeks later, the Millbrook Estates controversy had escalated from a neighborhood dispute into a full-blown municipal scandal. The city council convened a special hearing on HOA reform legislation, and the packed auditorium resembled the scene of a political revolution, complete with Robert's Rules of Order and name tags. Every seat was occupied by residents, reporters, city officials, and curious onlookers who had been following the story in the local news. The air was thick with nervous anticipation and the scent of institutional coffee that permeates government buildings like bureaucratic lifeblood. I was scheduled to testify on the need for stronger HOA oversight laws, but Veronica had other plans. Despite being out on bail and facing federal charges, she had persuaded her new lawyer, a slick individual who looked like he charged by the syllable, to allow her to make one final public relations push. Her strategy was classic narcissist playbook: portray herself as the victim of a wealthy newcomer's vindictive harassment campaign. She took the podium first, dressed in a navy outfit that likely cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and delivered a performance that deserved its own Netflix special. "I have dedicated 8 years of my life to serving this community," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I have volunteered countless hours, protected property values, and maintained the standards that make Millbrook Estates the desirable neighborhood it is today." The audience was initially quiet, with some even appearing sympathetic to her situation. She had always been adept at manipulation, and this was her crowning achievement. "Now, I am being targeted by a vindictive newcomer who could not accept reasonable community guidelines," she continued, her voice rising to a crescendo. "Marcus Reed has used his wealth and connections to destroy my reputation, my business, and my life over simple misunderstandings about property management." Several people nodded in agreement. Her victim narrative was convincing if you were unaware of the facts, and she had always been skilled at making her fraud sound like community service. Then, she made the mistake that unraveled everything. "I have never done anything illegal or unethical," she declared, her voice filled with righteous indignation. "Every action I took was to protect our community's interests and property values." It was at that point that I stood up and requested permission from the moderator to present evidence. "Before we proceed," I said, walking to the front of the room with my laptop and presentation remote, "I believe everyone should see what Ms. Whitfield's property protection actually entailed." The first video clip appeared on the large screen behind the podium. Security footage of Veronica hosting a dinner party in my dining room, complete with catered food and what appeared to be potential real estate clients touring my home. The auditorium fell silent, except for the audio from my security system, which captured Veronica's voice bragging to her guests about managing this beautiful property and the exclusive nature of our community's luxury homes. The second clip showed her rummaging through my personal papers in my home office, photographing documents with her phone. The third captured her coaching Dave on how to intimidate homeowners who asked too many questions about fees and violations. But the ultimate blow was the recovered audio from her crashed computer. A phone conversation in which she explicitly discussed using vacant homes as showcase properties for her real estate business, complete with her laughing about that divorced guy who thinks he's so smart. The audience's reaction shifted from sympathy to outrage. In real time, like watching a political rally change course mid-speech, murmurs of disbelief grew into angry whispers, then open expressions of disgust. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, advancing to the next slide, which displayed financial records, "this is $89,000 in documented fraud across multiple HOA communities. Emergency repairs that never occurred, vendors that do not exist, and fees collected for services never rendered." Detective Lisa Warren, who had been sitting quietly in the third row, stood up to address the crowd. Ms. Whitfield is currently under federal indictment for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. The FBI investigation has identified victims in 6 different communities. Veronica's lawyer attempted damage control, but you cannot unsee evidence or unhear recorded confessions. The mood of the crowd had shifted from curious to hostile, and even her most loyal supporters looked as if they had been personally betrayed. City Councilman Robert Morgan took the microphone with the authority of someone who had witnessed enough municipal scandals to last 3 lifetimes. The legislation before us today will require quarterly financial audits for all HOA boards. Mandatory. Disclosure of conflicts of interest and criminal background checks for community management positions. The vote was unanimous, 7-0, to pass the most comprehensive HOA reform legislation in the county's history. But the moment that made it all worthwhile came when elderly Mrs. Peterson, who had paid $800 in fraudulent fees she couldn't afford, stood up in the back row. "I want to thank Marcus Reed," she said, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium, "for having the courage to fight, back when the rest of us were too scared or too tired to resist." The standing ovation lasted for 3 full minutes and felt like absolution for every sleepless night I had spent wondering if the fight was worth it. As we exited the auditorium, Tyler nudged me with his elbow. "Dad, I think Aunt Dolores would be proud." He was right. She would have loved to see justice served with such thorough documentation. 6 months later, justice had been administered with the precision of a Swiss watch and the satisfaction of a perfectly executed revenge plot. Veronica pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have revealed even more victims and criminal associates. The federal judge sentenced her to 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered her to pay $127,000 in restitution to all identified victims. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and she was banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. Dave Kowalski received a 6-month sentence in county jail, lost his police pension, and was permanently barred from law enforcement. Witnessing a corrupt cop face consequences felt like discovering a unicorn in your backyard. Rare, magical, and utterly satisfying. The civil lawsuit was settled for an additional $45,000 in punitive damages, money that was used to establish what became known as the Millbrook Estates Good Neighbor Fund. The fund assists families facing temporary financial hardship with emergency home repairs, medical expenses, and other community support needs. Our new HOA board, to which I was somehow elected treasurer despite my protests, implemented a level of transparency that would make government accountants weep with joy. Monthly financial reports, open bidding for all contracts, and quarterly community meetings where actual neighbors discuss actual issues like civilized human beings. Property values in our neighborhood actually rose. After Veronica's removal, partly due to improved management and partly because buyers appreciate communities with transparent governance. It turns out that people prefer HOAs that protect property values through competent management rather than fear-based intimidation. The personal healing was what surprised me most. My house, which had felt violated and foreign for months, slowly became my home again. That fall, Tyler and I hosted our first annual backyard barbecue, with over 60 neighbors in attendance. The sound of children playing on the swing set I had installed in the exact spot where Veronica used to park her unauthorized BMW felt like reclaiming sacred ground. But the ripple effects reached far beyond our neighborhood. Marcus's Law, officially titled the Homeowner Protection and Transparency Act, became model legislation adopted by 3 other states within a year. The law mandates financial transparency, requires disclosure of conflicts of interest, and establishes clear procedures for challenging HOA decisions. I found myself testifying before the state legislature on HOA reform, speaking at homeowner rights conferences, and consulting with other communities facing similar corruption. My cybersecurity business actually expanded due to the publicity, as potential clients were impressed by my methodical approach to combating institutional fraud. The documentary When HOAs Go Rogue. One Man's Fight for Justice premiered at the local film festival and won the Audience Choice Award. Tyler was more excited about appearing in a documentary than about being accepted to his first choice college, which tells you everything you need to know about teenage priorities. But the community transformation was the true victory. Beth established annual community rights workshops where residents learn about property law, HOA governance, and how to recognize abuse of authority. We created a neighborhood newsletter that actually provides useful information instead of violation citations. The Homeowner Legal Defense Scholarship we founded helps law students offer free legal assistance to families fighting HOA abuse. Last year, they assisted 12 families in recovering over $30,000 in fraudulent fees and fines. 2 years after Veronica's arrest, our annual block party has become the neighborhood event that people genuinely look forward to, rather than endure. This year's party attracted over 100 attendees, including several families who had been victimized by Veronica's schemes in other communities. As I stood in my backyard, watching neighbors who had been strangers become genuine friends, and listening to children laugh instead of adults whispering about intimidation tactics, I reflected on what my Aunt Dolores always said: this house was meant to bring people together. She was right, just not in the way any of us had anticipated. The aroma of grilling burgers mingled with Beth's famous apple pie, while Tyler and his friends provided a soundtrack of teenage laughter from the volleyball net we had set up near the garden. For the first time since inheriting this beautiful house, it felt like the sanctuary my aunt had always intended it to be. If your HOA has ever done something shady, share your story in the comments below. You would be surprised at how common this type of abuse is and how often victims feel powerless to fight back. Trust me, you have more rights than you think, and sometimes, the bullies are the ones who are truly powerless when confronted with organized, informed resistance. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how we helped 3 more families defeat corrupt HOAs this year. Next week, I'll tell you about the city council member who thought she could shut down a veteran's food truck with fake health violations, until she learned he had been documenting everything for 6 months. Remember, documentation beats intimidation every single time. From all of us here at End for HOA, thank you so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma deliver, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.